Imagine waking up to the sound of police boots, crunching your grape leaves, while your HOA president, Karen, stands there filming, like she's directing a reality show about ruining your life. What would you do if your own neighborhood tried to strangle your family business over a petty grudge? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. 'Cause I bet your HOA pulled something just as ridiculous. Dawn, in Solstice Valley, looks like a postcard someone forgot to put back on the rack. Fog hangs low. A silver sheet sliding between rows of vines. I'm out there before the sun climbs the ridge. Pruning shears cold in my hand. When the sirens drift in from the county road, 2 officers step through the mist. Radios, hissing. Hands resting on duty. Belts like this is some kind of sting. And there she is, Karen Hartwell, queen of the Solstice Heights HOA. Shellacked hair. White SUV, idling crooked at my gate, holding up her phone to catch her trophy shot. You could smell her perfume before you saw her smile. Name's Marcus Thornfield. 3 years back, I was a corporate attorney in San Francisco. Billing $400 an hour. Arguing about air rights with hedge funds that thought the sun was negotiable. Then my marriage detonated. Turns out, my ex preferred my law partner's handshake more than mine. The divorce stripped me fast and clean. Like a tree losing bark to a wildfire. All I had left was my grandfather's 40-acre vineyard in Solstice Valley land, with lines drawn by calloused hands and a pencil stub. Not a developer's ruler. The farmhouse creaks like an old man's knees when the weather shifts. My German Shepherd, Barrel, treats delivery trucks like Viking raids. But after years of boardrooms and backstabs, walking the rows at first light felt like truth, wet leaves. Quiet breath. Soil that knows your name. The place needed love. The irrigation system belonged in a museum next to lava lamps. The tractor coughed like a smoker. Still, it was my grandfather's legacy vines he planted, when folks here minded their business and waved with all 5 fingers. Enter Karen. Picture the word no with lipstick. She runs Solstice Heights like a theme park for beige lifestyles matching mailboxes. Identical shutters. Lawns trimmed short enough to shave with. Her husband, Preston Hartwell, flips land the way gamblers flip chips. He builds those copy-paste McMansions that look like an algorithm, took a nap, and drooled siding. They moved in on the crest above my vines, brand new stucco. Brand new rules. Brand new attitude. Trouble started with a fence. I replaced my old, sagging line with solid agricultural fencing to keep deer out and tourists from wandering in after tastings. I'm digging post holes. Sweat mixing with dust. When a car door slams, like a judge's gavel, Karen marches over in a bone-white power suit. Heels stabbing the dirt like she's aerating it for sport. Clipboard tucked tight. Smile stretched thin. That fence violates our aesthetic standards, she says. Ma'am, I say, resting on the shovel. This farm's been here for 6 decades. Your HOA's been here for, what, 3 years? She blinked, slow, like I'd cussed in church. Rules are rules. This is a residential neighborhood now. We have standards. That word residential came out like I was a raccoon she caught washing grapes in her pool. She clicked back to the SUV and peeled off with a hiss. 2 days later, a thick, official letter. Cease and desist. Claims my vineyard operations violate residential zoning. Threatens daily fines, $500 a pop. Copied the county, my bank, and the local paper. Not a complaint, an opening salvo. Here's what Karen didn't know. Before God and grapes saved my sanity, I spent 15 years in real estate law. I know the playbook. I also know agricultural properties often carry something developers pretend not to understand: grandfathered rights. My grandfather's deed likely had teeth: perpetual farming rights that chew through HOA nonsense like a wood chipper. I called Jake Morrison, an old law school buddy turned environmental lawyer with a voice like gravel and a laugh like a chainsaw. "Marcus," he said. "Sounds like someone poked a sleeping bear." "Be the bear." Barrel thumped his tail like he'd seconded the motion. I dove into the farmhouse filing cabinet, steel drawers that stick inside, flipping through tax receipts browned like toast and maps drawn in pencil on butcher paper. And there it was, a manila folder marked "Important, keep forever." Inside, the deed and an agricultural exemption from 1962. Perpetual farming rights. Spelled out in the kind of language that survives storms, elections, and HOA newsletters. I drafted a response that could make my old professor weep. Deed, statute, historic use, certified mail to the county, the bank, the paper, and Karen's HOA inbox, bless her heart. 2 mornings later, a county inspector hops out of a dusty sedan by the barn. "Rodriguez," he says, apologizing with his eyes before his mouth catches up. "Anonymous tip about unpermitted structures." Anonymous. Smelled like expensive perfume and entitlement. He spent half a day measuring, noting, tapping beams. The barn grandfathered. Equipment shed permitted. Root cellar legal since the Johnson administration. He signed off, handed me the copy, and said, "Your agricultural exemption is ironclad. Whoever's complaining doesn't understand rural zoning." Karen had drawn blood from her own lip and didn't know it. This wasn't about offense. It was about leverage. A week later, a notice went out. Emergency HOA Board Meeting, Community Beautification Standards. Subheadline: Addressing agricultural eyesores impacting property values. Subtle as a siren. I showed up. The community center reeked of industrial cleaner and anxious coffee. About 30 homeowners sat in folding chairs like passengers on a flight they regretted boarding. The board up front nodded so hard their necks must have ached. Karen clicked through a PowerPoint on neighborhood character and investment protection. Polite corporate words, dressed for combat. Then, she presented a petition. Concerned neighbors of Solstice Heights. Signatures stacked like sandwiches. The way she said commercial agricultural operation, you'd think I was cooking meth in the barn. Open discussion. And God bless Mrs. Patterson, retired teacher. Cardigan, like armor. She stood up. Spine straight. Eyes bright. Marcus's family kept these vines alive before any of us dreamed of moving here. This valley was farms before it was driveways. The vineyard is the character. A murmur. That kind that moves across a room like wind in grass. Karen's smile cracked. She tabled the vote for further legal review. Which is HOA for I didn't get my way tonight. As I left, gravel popping under my boots. I caught her whispering with a briefcase in a suit. He had that billable hour cologne. When she saw me, the whisper died. Barrel sat up in the truck. Ears perked. Guardian. Judge. Jury. Karen's next move. If you can't beat a farmer in court, try to starve him in public. She spun up a Facebook group, Concerned Neighbors of Solstice Valley, and posted angled photos of my tractor like it was a war machine. Anyone else worried about the trucks? flies, smells. She wrapped lies in just asking questions. And fear did the rest. Folks at the market suddenly needed to count their change while I bagged their purchases. The hardware guy, the one who'd once talked weather with me for half an hour, went colder than January. Then the bank. Janet, who'd handled my grandfather's loans for 2 decades, suddenly needed additional documentation for a routine line of credit. Her smile slid around like it was on a greasy pan. My stomach did that slow unclench that comes right before you get mad for real. I started digging. County records at midnight. Coffee. Flashlight. Patience. Preston Hartwell's name was everywhere. Lots. Options. Easements. He'd been quietly buying acreage and pushing approvals, like a man who'd found a button labeled profit. The math was ugly. Farmland sells cheap. Rezone to residential, and the price jumps like a flea on a hot plate. My 40 acres. Millions. If he could pry it from me. Textbook land grab. Jake said when I called. And they're betting you don't know your rights. So I hired a surveyor and ordered a full title search back to the horse and wagon days. While we waited, Karen doubled down. Community safety forum. Petitions photocopied until the signatures looked like they'd been made by one tired hand. Rumors about chemical use and late-night traffic. She staged pictures like a low-budget news special. I mean, does anyone feel safe? She typed. Her followers nodded like dashboard bobbleheads. 3 afternoons later, the surveyor walked into my kitchen with a grin. "You're gonna love this," he said. My land extended 50 feet further east than anyone thought, straight under the fence lines of 3 Solstice Heights backyards. Grandfather had granted construction easements back when handshake deals still meant something, but he'd never sold the dirt. And a utility easement ran like a river through the valley roads. Lines. Access legal as a heartbeat. Karen called another safety meeting. Maybe 20 bodies in plastic chairs. She talked about drunk drivers and fire hazards. About protecting families. Like grapes were grenades. Honestly. It would have been funny if it wasn't messing with my bookings. But she wasn't done. A week later, a heavy envelope arrived from Hartwell. Morrison and Associates, no relation to my Jake. Stationery so fancy it probably wore cufflinks. Cease and desist. Public nuisance. Injunctive relief. 12 alleged violations. Noise. Traffic. Improper commercial use. Each one dressed up like a law school hypo, written by a liar. They gave me 72 hours to stop operating. 72 hours to shut down a farm that had fed my family for generations. Bankruptcy lives in letters like that. And Karen knew it. Here's what they didn't know. I'd spent a decade and a half building cases just like the one they were bluffing. That night, I took a thermos the size of a baseball bat to the courthouse and rolled the microfilm machine until my eyes went buzzy. Somewhere after midnight, the past shuffled forward to shake my hand. Solstice Valley, 1987, Historic Agricultural District designation. Not a brochure. A statute with bite. Development inside the ring requires environmental impact studies. Soil and water assessments. Habitat review, the full orchestra. And get this tucked in a misfiled folder like $1 in an old coat, letters from the time. Acknowledging the designation. Either Preston's team missed it, or they chose to pretend it didn't exist. I knew which way I was leaning. My laugh scared a pigeon out of the rafters. I copied what I needed and drove home with the windows down. Cold night air in my teeth. Barrel met me at the door. Tail drumming. "We got him," I told him. He sneezed like an amen. By sunrise. I had a plan, and coffee stout enough to varnish a table. I looped Jake in, and he looped in the state. "Marcus," he said, "this isn't just HOA harassment anymore. This smells like fraud." He had that edge to his voice lawyers get when the facts line up like billiard balls. "We're going to need science." Enter Dr. Sarah Bennett, soil scientist. Soft laugh. Sharp brain. Boots that had real dirt on them. I laid the documents out on my kitchen table. She traced a finger along old survey lines, like a cartographer reading secrets. If they built without the required studies, they disrupted groundwater recharge and wildlife corridors. She said, "I can show it." Barrel nosed her toad for treats. She bribed him with a biscuit and earned a fan for life. Then I called Father Miguel Santos, the kind of pastor who blesses tractor tires and knows the birthdays of every field hands kid. He'd been organizing against displacement for years. "Brother," he said, "son, not even a. The valley's been waiting for someone with the law on their side. You won't stand alone." He meant it. By that evening, 4 other farming families were in my barn. Coffee steaming. Anger hotter. 2 had been pushed to sell. 2 were hanging on by their fingernails. We formed the Valley Farmers Alliance that night, under a string of thrift store lights, while the smell of hay and diesel tied itself into our clothes. Meanwhile, Ethel, at the courthouse, who's been wrangling paper longer than most politicians have been alive, took one look at my stack and said, "Honey, I remember when that heritage thing got filed. Caused a ruckus." She vanished into the stacks and returned with a folder that looked like it had survived a flood and a small war. Inside, more teeth. Specific buffer zones. Mandatory impact reviews. Enforcement procedures. The kind of detail that makes developers sweat through their undershirts. Been in the wrong drawer since. "Oh, forever," she said. "Mercy." Our prep felt like gearing up for a storm. Cameras on the fence lines. A binder for every category of nonsense they might try. Jake drafted a motion for a temporary restraining order to keep HOA reps from interfering with agricultural operations, a surgical tool with a sledgehammer's effect. Sarah pulled soil cores near the McMansion slopes and mapped runoff patterns no one in a white SUV wanted to think about. Miguel gathered affidavits from families who'd been persuaded to sell stories that smelled of pressure and tasted of fear. Karen, sensing her grip slipping, cranked the harassment from annoying to criminal. My irrigation main got cut clean. Purposeful. Thousands of gallons bled into the dirt. Wedding clients started getting mysterious phone calls about chemical contamination and permit issues. Reviews popped up online claiming our wine tasted like vinegar and our events ended in food poisoning. Creativity. I'll give her that. Conscience. Not so much. The TRO hit like thunder. 18 pages that said, in essence, shut up and back off. Violate it, and a judge will explain consequences using words you do not want on your permanent record. I served it with the calm of a man who knows what he's holding. Karen read page 1 and went the color of skim milk. Then my favorite thing happened. 3 HOA board members resigned. Ethical concerns. Their email said, translation, we didn't sign up for federal charges. Not long after, the local paper ran a polite-sounding story about unusual permit history in Solstice Heights. Folks read between the lines. You could feel the neighborhood's posture change from hands on hips to hands in pockets. By then, Sarah's report was coming together like a jigsaw, with one satisfying piece left. Groundwater modeling suggested contamination risk. Soil compaction from improper grading. Wildlife routes, severed like cut ropes. What they did here, she said, lining up the maps, will take years to fix right. Her voice didn't shake, but I could hear the anger around the edges. The FBI didn't show up in a windbreaker like on television. Agent Rodriguez, remember, the inspector asked if we could talk. He flipped his badge with the same hand that had held a clipboard on my property. Crossover assignment, he said. Complaints like this often trace back to mail and wire fraud. He didn't smile. I didn't either. He fitted a recorder into a pocket and said, "Do not be a hero. Be a witness." I nodded. Witness I could be. Preston tried a charm offensive next. He came at first light. Fog clinging to his sport coat. "Marcus," he said. Smile straining. "Let's solve this like gentlemen." He offered a number that would make most folks' knees wobble, millions to go away. Quick close. Confidentiality. The whole velvet-gloved package. I told him I wouldn't sell him this land for 10 times that number, and a private island. The mask slipped. "You have no idea," he said. Voice low. "Who you're messing with." Thing is, I did. And his threat went right into the recorder. Sweet as a lullaby. He left ruts in my driveway. Beryl watched him go with that look dogs get when they're deciding whether something is a threat or just a terrible smell. Both. I told him. Beryl huffed like yeah. Obviously. The community split like firewood. Half of Solstice Heights yanked their kids away from Karen's orbit. The other half leaned harder into the HOA gospel lawns. Lines. And letters. The farmers rallied, backing each other's markets and helping hands move faster than rumors. Miguel turned Sunday sermons into quiet masterclasses stewardship. Justice. The sin of greed. He never named names from the pulpit, but you could feel the Hartwells flinch. Bookings dipped, then steadied. People like a fight when the hero's cause is clean. We started hosting heritage nights, barrel tastings, alongside old stories from the valley's elders. The smell of wood smoke and pulled pork braided itself through laughter. You could hear kids chasing each other between the barrels, their squeaks echoing like sparrows. It sounded like a verdict. Karen tried to stage another big show community safety town hall, but 6 loyalists and a bored teenager showed up. She sweated through a silk blouse while the projector chewed the HDMI cable like a goat. I almost felt bad. Almost. Then, she went nuclear on social media. 20 rants a day. Outside agitators. Fake news. Toxins in the soil. Tax liens. Federal seizure. Choose your conspiracy. Folks started unfollowing her with the speed of common sense. Even the supermarket cashiers quit nodding along. Meanwhile, Jake found something rotten in the HOA books. Payments to shell companies for consulting. Security. Legal review. Money out with no real services in. That's not just messy, he said, running a pen down a column. That's potentially embezzlement. He flagged it, filed it, and smiled. That lawyer smile that isn't actually a smile. Preston's financing showed cracks. Public filings told the story. Construction loans maturing. Deadlines looming. Extension denied. Suppliers wanted cash on the barrelhead. Crews went home early. Nothing knocks swagger off a developer like a bank that's finished saying, please. The harassment spiked. One ugly week. Dead fish dumped at the gate. Anonymous letters promising accidents. Bogus noise complaints at midnight. We logged everything. Cameras saw everything. Agent Rodriguez said, "Thank you." Like each incident was another nail in a very particular coffin. I slept lighter. Shotgun locked, but near. Not because I planned to use it, but because my grandfather had taught me that the sound of a pump is a language fools understand. Beryl patrolled like a furry deputy. "You're a good boy," I'd tell him. More for my nerves than his ego. He'd sneeze like, "Yeah, I know." And then, because stories love symmetry, the county announced a public mediation to resolve community disputes at the town hall. Jake's idea. Packaged in friendly language. Dressed in good intentions. Attended by people who mattered. The state sent observers. The local station rolled a camera truck to the curb. The room filled faster than church on Christmas Eve. The air tasted like burnt coffee and verdicts. Karen hit the stage in a suit crisp enough to cut. She performed grievance like a one-woman show: property values, safety, illegal commercial use. The whole set list. She held up a petition like a trophy. "We built something beautiful," she said. "And one selfish man, one business threatens it." Preston played diplomat. "I'm prepared to offer a fair solution," he said, hand on his heart. "For the sake of harmony." He glanced at me. That used car sincerity thick as syrup. I stood. I thanked everyone for caring enough to show up. Then, I laid out the map. The deed from 1962. The heritage designation from 1987. The survey lines that ran under fenced-in lawns. Sarah's water models. The HOA payments that vanished into empty companies. The TRO. The online threats. The cut irrigation line. And finally, the public records permits missing, where permits needed to exist. With each document, the room shifted from skepticism to stillness. And because I believe in friendly resolutions, I said, I invited some friends. Agent Rodriguez walked in with two other feds in suits that said unimpressed by nonsense. You could feel the oxygen leave the building. Karen's jaw twitched. Preston's lawyers suddenly had very important shoelaces to inspect. "Mr. Hartwell," Rodriguez said, calm, courteous, cruel, in the way truth is, "we'd like to discuss a few irregularities." The camera lights popped like fireworks. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God," and no one told them to hush. Karen pointed at me. Voice shaking. "He's lying. This is a smear. He sees." She searched for a word that would make me disappear. It didn't arrive. "Ma'am," the mediator said softly. "Please sit." The word please sounded ceremonial. Like last call. 6 months later, I sat on a wooden bench that remembered better days and watched the judge pour plain language over complicated crimes. Mail fraud, wire fraud, environmental violations. Preston got years. Not pretend years. Real ones. The judge called it a systematic exploitation of agricultural families, and I swear the gavel struck like thunder. Karen pleaded down to a short stint and community service, plus fines that took the rims off her white SUV dreams. She kept her chin high walking out, but the high school principal energy was gone. Pride don't look the same in fluorescent light. Solstice Heights, the HOA folded faster than a card table in a windstorm. Homeowners elected a transitional committee that hired a forensic accountant. What they found in those books would make your hair swear fake invoices. Shell vendors. Consulting that consulted nothing. Folks started planting tomatoes where the rules once forbade laundry lines. Some cried. Most exhaled. The county. With the state. Stamped our valley with a reinforced heritage designation buffers bigger. Enforcement sharper. Preston's unpermitted houses, those boxes that rose on bulldozed promises, were condemned. Then dismantled. I watched a backhoe bite into a beige facade and felt something like mercy. Wildlife corridors reopened like veins. The creek ran clearer by fall. I took settlement money and started the Solstice Valley Heritage Foundation. Scholarships for farm kids who want to study soil and water. Micro-grants for small operations trying to upgrade without selling their souls. School tours where fourth graders stick their hands in compost and squeal like it's magic, 'cause it kinda is. The first Harvest Festival after everything broke wide open was the biggest party since the county fair learned how to fry Oreos. Smoke. Music. Laughter. The valley sounding like itself again. Sarah and I learned each other's morning coffee orders and thunderstorm tells. She moved into the farmhouse with a microscope and a laugh that starts in her eyes. Beryl pretends he likes her dog, Justice, and sometimes forgets he's pretending. At dusk, we walk the rows. She presses a clump of soil between finger and thumb, murmurs about structure and moisture. And I just listen and fall a little more in love with the ground that raised me and the woman who reads it. The Alliance meets in my barn every other Thursday. We share crop data and marketing tricks and the best way to explain buffer zones to a county planner who's trying. Drew 7 Viking 20 men. We agree, no one fights alone. Father Miguel keeps the coffee strong and the story stronger. Ethel's writing a book about filing cabinets and crooks. She says I'm in chapter 5. I told her I want Beryl on the cover. Here's the thing, I didn't expect messages from across the country. Oregon, Texas, Vermont. People with land and history and HOAs that smell like opportunity. They send me screenshots of letters. Ask if terms mean what they feel like they mean. I don't give legal advice. Don't need another bar complaint in my life. But I point at resources. At words to Google. At questions to ask. Knowledge doesn't spoil. Share it. And, yeah, there's more. Turned out Preston wasn't a solo act. There's a network developers swapping templates like recipes. HOAs weaponized as pressure hoses. Banks that wink look the other way. The feds tugged the thread and found a sweater. I keep my head down. Keep my notes clean. Keep the recorder charged when meetings accidentally happen. You'd be amazed what people say when they think you're just a farmer. My favorite sentence in the English language these days, on advice of counsel. It makes certain people go pale. Am I bitter? Less than I expected. Thing about planting is you learn patience disguised as work. Vines suffer pruning. Then they run. Then they rest. Then they give. Justice, turns out, has the same seasons. Let me rewind. 'Cause some of y'all asked how the very first scene, Police in the Vines, Karen, filming like she's Spielberg, shook out. That morning, the officers stepped careful. Hands visible. The way good cops do when they suspect they've been sent into a circus. We got a call about illegal activity. One said, glancing from Karen's phone to my pruning shears, mind if we look around? Be my guest. I poured coffee into paper cups from my thermos. Because hospitality is a choice and also a tactic. Beryl leaned against my knee like a quiet warning and also a ham. We walked the first row. The second. The officers admired the view. I admired their politeness. Karen narrated for her audience. He admitted. He refused. He threatened. The officers ignored her. After 10 minutes, one took a sip and said, "Sir, everything looks peaceful." He thanked me for the coffee. I thanked him for the courtesy. Karen filmed his gratitude like it was a confession. Later, when all of this hit newsprint and living rooms, that clip played like a blooper reel. Folks like receipts. Folks like seeing bullies trip over their own shoelaces. If I'm honest, I rewound it a few times myself on the bad days when bookings dipped and rumors prickled. Humor is a blade that doesn't break. The ugliest days were the middle ones, between the TRO and the arrests when the smear machine tried to turn my name into mud. There's people who'll believe anything if it's printed neat. My grandfather used to say. He also used to say, "Plant, anyway." So I did. I planted a row for him and a row for the neighbors who remembered when this valley only had one stoplight and plenty of sense. I planted a row for folks who DM'd me stories of HOAs fining them for flagpoles, swing sets, or swear to God, the color of a mailbox. Planting is prayer with calluses. The night before mediation, I stood at the top of the north block where you can see the valley breathe. Stars balanced on the ridge. Coyotes yip the way they do when they're telling secrets. I rehearsed my opening. Then didn't use half of it because the truth did the heavy lifting. I whispered, thanks to whoever watches over fools and farmers. Barrel pressed against my leg and sighed like an old man. "We're gonna be okay." I told him. He farted. Which, you know, is also an omen. When the judge read Preston's sentence months later, the room was quiet enough to hear wrists shift in cuffs. Karen dabbed her eyes with a tissue, like a woman in a play about consequences. I didn't cheer. I didn't want to give them that kind of space in my throat. I saved my voice for the Vineyard crew. For the Alliance meeting. For laughing at a kid's first taste of muscadine. Face puckered and delighted. We saved clippings from the condemned houses, the ones slated for dismantling, and turned them into trellises for the community garden. It felt right. Letting something that propped up greed learn to hold beans and tomatoes. Sarah says, that's called remediation. I say it's called good use. So here's the heartbeat. Plain HOA bullies thrive on silence. On folks being too busy or too tired to read the fine print. On neighbors who want the lawn trimmed and the mailboxes matching and don't notice the knife under the welcome sign. They count on you not knowing acres from easements. Permits from propaganda. Rights from rules made by people who like the taste of power. They bank on fear yours, not theirs. What worked here wasn't me being some courtroom cowboy. It was a community deciding enough. It was an old clerk remembering the right drawer. A scientist who cared more about aquifers than applause. A priest who organized casseroles and signatures with equal zeal. Farmers with backs like bridges and hands that didn't shake when the mail came heavy. And, yeah, an FBI agent who kept the badge quiet until the moment it mattered. The valley wears the wind softly. The creek laughs louder. The owls are back in the cypress. Tour buses have started parking under the old eucalyptus. And I'm fine with it. 'Cause those folks buy wine and listen to stories. We bottle a red called Justice and a white called Mercy. 'Cause Sarah said the names were corny, and I said, yep. And we laughed and did it anyway. If you're listening because your HOA wrote you a letter that made your hands sweat, hear me breathe. Read. Ask. Document. Don't swing wild. Find the paper. Paper tells on liars. Find your neighbors. Bullies hate a crowd that can count. Find the law older than fads. Steadier than Facebook. sharper than a fancy letterhead. And if you can, grow something. Tomatoes. Herbs. A new habit of saying hello across fences. Growth is defiance you can eat. I was a lawyer who burned out. A husband who got left. A man who thought money was the only scoreboard that mattered. Now I'm just a farmer with a good dog. A better woman. And a valley that decided to remain itself. Turns out, victory tastes best when it's shared on paper plates, under a string of lights, with somebody's kid falling asleep in a lawn chair, and somebody's aunt telling a story about the time she scared a raccoon with a broom. Your turn. What would you do if your HOA tried to shut down your livelihood over a grudge? Anyone else had a board call the cops on a fence? A flower bed? Or your front porch flag? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me your state. Your valley. Your cul-de-sac. Tell me what you planted after they told you not to. And if you're in the middle of it right now, if your mailbox just coughed up a letter with words like violation and immediate, you ain't alone. Not here. Not anymore. When good people fight back with facts, law, and neighbors who bring casseroles and copies of the minutes, the bullies eventually sit down. They always do. And the wine lord. The wine tastes better when fear's not drinking first.